This is Fat2Fierce. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English. Join me on this empowering adventure towards a healthier relationship with food, body, and self, one delicious bite at a time. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English, and this is episode number 46. So I'm recording this episode on December 2nd, 2024, and this is a significant date for me. This is the day 11 years ago in 2013 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I chose this day, December 2nd, to mark the anniversary because it was the day that changed the trajectory of our lives. Not just my life, but my family's lives. And so today I'm going to share the story because it's a story about listening to your intuition. It's a story about following the breadcrumbs. And ultimately, it's a story about learning to trust yourself. And it's important. So come with me as we take a trip down memory lane for a little bit until we get to the present day. So trying to figure out where I want to start with the story. So I'm going to begin with the pimple. Hang on for this ride, okay? I haven't told this story to this extent yet on this podcast. If you've listened to the previous episodes, then you know it was the breast cancer diagnosis that helped me realize my habit of stress eating, right? Because I gained 30 pounds in the first month of my diagnosis in December of 2013. I've talked about that before. But today I'm going to go through the entire story, like the timeline of events, because I think it's really important. And I think it's going to highlight how important it is to start to listen to that voice that is your intuition. And just a heads up, I always say crying is my superpower. I may cry on this episode because this topic does get me a little emotional, as I'm sure you can imagine. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to just dive in. And I guess what I want to share first is, whenever there's like a major event, like a major life event, there's the time before that event and the time after that event, right? We all experienced this collectively when it comes to COVID, right? The pandemic. There's like this clear line in the sand. And so, there's the life before COVID and the life after COVID, right? Breast cancer is very similar. Listen, any kind of major life-altering event is going to be that way, where there's like the time before, the time after, and then there's like that sliver of time during when everything's happening. And so I'm just going to kind of tell this starting with the zit. All right. So we're going to go back in time to 2013. Can't believe it's been 11 years. Like, seriously, just blows my mind. Anyway, and I also feel very fortunate because cancer is scary. So is any major medical diagnosis, right? It was terrifying. But it all started with a pimple. All right. So back in 2013, I had a pimple on my left breast. And it was there for a long time, like several weeks, I'm thinking. And it was bothering me, but it just wasn't going away. In fact, I remember my mom and I had gone to lunch. This would have been sometime in November of that year, like early November. We were living in Buffalo at the time. I was still working in wireless telecommunications, okay? And my mom and I had gone to lunch, and I remember telling her about this zit that was on my boob. She was like, "Oh, just keep an eye on it. I'm sure it's nothing. It'll go away." And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it's nothing. Well, it was interesting because there was this one specific day that I was watching TV during my lunch break. And I normally never watch TV when I'm working, even during my lunch break. And I've been working from home for a long time. Okay. I've been working from home since my daughter was born in 2008. And I never watched TV during the day. But for some reason, there was this particular day. It was right around Thanksgiving time. So it was later in November. And I had turned on TV and it was a talk show. It might have been the doctors or something. I can't even remember. But there was a TV show, a talk show on, and there was a whole segment about breast cancer. And I just remember sitting on the sofa, looking at my chest, at the zit that was still there, and thinking, I should call the doctor. I should call the doctor and make an appointment. And so that's what I did. And I told them that I had a pimple on my boob and I wanted to have it looked at. And they were like, no problem. We can squeeze you in the next day. That would have been Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving that year. Okay. So I go for this appointment thinking it's probably nothing, but it doesn't hurt to check. I remember some of my coworkers laughing at me because I was going to the doctor to have a pimple looked at, but whatever. There was something inside of me that knew I needed to go get this looked at. Okay. That's the intuition. So I go to the appointment. The doctor sees me. She takes a look at my boob. She sees the pimple and she's like, I think it's just a zit. But since you're here, let me go ahead and do an exam. All right. She does the exam, the breast exam. And she asks me, she's on my right side. She asks the question, have you felt this before? And she put my hand there. I'm not going to illustrate it on this video, but she put my hand there and I felt a lump. Now, in my mind in the moment at that time, felt like it was the size of a golf ball, okay? But I said, no, I've never felt that before. What is that? And she said, we're going to let me see if I can get you in for some imaging today. Let's see if we can get you scheduled for a mammogram. I was like, okay. Now, keep in mind, this is the day before Thanksgiving, right? So it's the day before a long holiday weekend. They were able to get me in. I had to go to a different location to have the mammogram done. This would have been my second mammogram because my doctor, thankfully, had me go for my first mammogram when I turned 35 to get the baseline. I will be forever grateful for that experience. Anyway, I went. It was absolutely packed. They squeezed me in. And what was supposed to be, well, what I assumed would be a quick appointment ended up being almost an 8-hour experience at the imaging center. Because after they did the mammogram, they needed to do an ultrasound and they needed to do multiple biopsies. Okay. You can see where this is going. All happening the day before Thanksgiving in a very crowded doctor's office. I remember my husband, Garrett, and the kids who were little at the time, 4 and 5, had to bring me food because we were supposed to be leaving for my sister's house for the Thanksgiving holiday. I was not planning on being in a doctor's office all day and I didn't have any food. I was hungry, so they brought me food. It was a long day. And at the end of that appointment, because keep in mind, I wasn't going to get the results that day. I was going to have to go through the holiday weekend before I knew anything. But at the end of that appointment, I sat down with the radiologist. And by this point, I was pretty much the only one left. And I remember asking him, I said, listen, no bullshit. What are you seeing? And he said to me, this is where I'm going to cry. Oh, I can remember it so clearly. And he said to me, and he was hesitant, but I begged him. I was like, please just tell me what you're seeing. And he said, I will be very surprised if this is not cancer. Whew. And so I just remember feeling like the walls were closing in on me. Keep in mind, I'm by myself. I'm at this appointment. I've been there all day long. And it just felt like the walls were closing in that moment. And I remember one of the nurses came over and she's rubbing my back and like they were wonderful. And I was grateful. I was grateful to him for sharing that. I seriously was. It ended up being one of the worst Thanksgiving weekends of my life, as you can imagine. But I was grateful to have that information, because honestly, it just helped me realize that this could be something. And so I just had to wait. And so we did end up going to my sister's that weekend. It seriously was the worst weekend, the worst holiday, Thanksgiving holiday, I think, of all of our lives. And I remember on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, that I forgot about this until just now, the doctor's office had called me, and we were all on alert, right? I remember the doctor's office called my cell phone, and I ran upstairs to take the call, and it ended up being just they just wanted to see how I was doing. They didn't have the results. And so everybody was on edge. My mom was there. We were all there, and it was just a rough weekend. Anyway, long story short, too late. On Monday, after the holiday weekend, December 2nd, 2013, I received the call that I did in fact test positive for breast cancer. I did have cancer. And in that moment, when I got off the phone, my doctor who called, she said to me, she's like, I'm not going to pull you into the office to tell you this. You've already waited the entire weekend. She gave me the news. She gave me a list of things to do. I mean, a list of next steps, which I was also grateful for. I hung up the phone. I threw a temper tantrum. And then I got to work, because when you're diagnosed with cancer, probably any major illness, you have to go through a series of steps, next steps, right? So I had to book scans and go through all this stuff. And so that was all taking place. And that is when I remember stress eating like bananas. It was the holiday season. We had a ton of stuff at the house. And I just remember for the next several weeks, as we were working through everything, because of course I chose to go to Roswell Cancer Institute. That was in Buffalo. And I had scans and all kinds of tests and everything that were scheduled throughout the month of December that year. And I just ate my way through it. I mean, I think I was eating and drinking, because I remember a lot of wine that year, and just gained 30 pounds in that month. Because as you can imagine, breast cancer is a stressful situation. And I think especially because I had two little kids at the time, like they were so little. Rebecca was in kindergarten, Ryan was in pre-K, right? And here we were dealing with this. So it was really terrifying when I think about it, when I think back on it. And what's interesting though is this. So when I was going to the hospital, so after the diagnosis was confirmed and I started going to the hospital for the scans, of course, all the doctors wanted to see the pimple. The pimple was long gone. The pimple was gone after my diagnosis was confirmed. And I just think that is fascinating. We've often said that little pimple was like a little angel. But here's the deal. It's because I listened to my intuition. I trusted that voice inside that was telling me, go get this looked at. And it's a different voice than my critic. It's a different voice than me freaking out about something, because I wasn't freaking out. It was just a very calm, centered, solid type voice that was saying, go get this looked at. Okay. Very different than like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, right? Totally different voice, sound, tenor, everything. That was my intuition. And that is the same voice that I experienced at the end of December that year. Okay. after I realized I gained 30 pounds. And the reason I knew I gained 30 pounds is because I was going to the doctor so often. And every time that I would go, they were weighing me. And I remember looking at my weight at the end of December, because keep in mind, I had just lost 100 pounds, right? I had just lost 100 pounds in November of that year, my big, huge 100-pound weight loss milestone, right? And at the end of December, I remember looking at my weight and realizing I'd gained 30 pounds. And I was just like, holy crap, what just happened? And it was that same voice, same familiar sound that said, you got to figure out how to stop stress eating. It wasn't freaking out about the weight. It wasn't like spazzing out, like, got to find a new diet or anything like that. It was very calm. It was very clear. And it was just very straightforward. It's time to figure out how to stop stress eating. And really, I think that's the moment. Didn't know it at the time, but that really is the moment Fat2Fierce was created, when you think about it. I mean, it wouldn't be until 2017 that name came to me, Fat2Fierce, but it was in December of 2013 when I realized I had to figure out how to stop stress eating. I didn't need another diet. I didn't need another plan. I didn't need another guru telling me what to do, what to eat, how to exercise. No, I needed to figure out this relationship with food. I needed to figure out why I turned to food when life threw a curveball like breast cancer. So again, listening to that intuition, listening to that calm, clear, straightforward voice inside of me that knew. And so when I think about this diagnosis, as scary as it was, is still to this day. I mean, it's changed over the years. Like, I can remember being very emotional on this day over the last 11 years, and I'm still emotional today, but it changes over time, right? And there is kind of always this feeling of like, could it come back? Of course it could. Like, yeah, of course it could. But I'm not as focused on that as I was in the past, right? So it changes over time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But as scary as a time that it was, it became very clear to me what my intuition sounds like. And it hasn't changed. That voice, I know that voice. And I know when it's my intuition versus a part of me that's freaking out. It's a very different sound. So I say that because I think it's helpful for everybody to get familiar with what what that intuitive voice sounds like, right? It's different than the critic. The critic can be very harsh, very nasty. My critic is very sharp, very loud. She kind of has the bullhorn, if you know what I mean, shouting the things. Where is that intuitive part of me? My intuition is just very, I don't know what, like, very strong. It's not super loud, but it's deep, if that makes sense. Getting familiar with with what those voices sound like can be very helpful, because distinguishing between your inner critic, your inner cheerleader, and like your inner wise self is incredibly, incredibly important and very helpful throughout life. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I absolutely followed traditional medicine. You know, I went to the Cancer Institute. I did the things. But I also decided to explore alternative medicine. So it was a combination of the two. This is when I discovered meditation. I hadn't really meditated before then. It's when I discovered Reiki, energy healing. I am Reiki certified, by the way. It's when I discovered life coaching, although that wouldn't be until after treatment, right? When I discovered life coaching, because so another big piece, another big thing that happened as a result of my cancer diagnosis. So, number one was realizing I needed to figure out how to stop stress eating. And the second was I needed to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up. I knew that I didn't want to be in wireless telecommunications anymore. I knew that I wanted to find a fulfilling career, something that I really was passionate about. I often talked about starting my own business, because I really craved flexibility. I wanted to be home when my kids got off the bus. I didn't want to be traveling for work anymore because at the time I was. I wanted to be there for them as they were starting to go through school. And so after my cancer treatment, of course, again, this is that sliver of time where first things first, how to get through cancer, right? So I went through, I found out what my treatment plan was going to be, went through that entire process, started dabbling in some alternative healing. So as I mentioned, meditation, Reiki, I also discovered theta healing at that time, which was amazing. Lots of really cool things I started to dabble with because I started following breadcrumbs. I started trusting the breadcrumbs that I was receiving and meeting different people who were dabbling in these different modalities. It was really fascinating. And I just started to kind of follow it and see what it was all about and trust what my intuition was telling me. And so after treatment, which would have been around 2014, 2015-ish, I happened to be at the dentist one day and I had to use the facilities. And so as I was walking in the hallway, there was a sign for a life coach. I'd never heard of a life coach before. I remember thinking, the hell is a life coach? But I took down her number and I decided to call. And several months later, I decided to sign up for her 3-month program. And again, this was me following breadcrumbs, right? This is what I was practicing doing after having gone through this super traumatic event called cancer, right? But I called this life coach, had a conversation with her. I ended up signing up with her for a 3-month program. It was amazing. And it was at the end of that 3-month program that I realized what I wanted to be when I grow up. I wanted to be a life coach. And that's when I decided to go through the life coaching program, the Martha Beck Life Coach Training Program. And what was so bizarre is it was also the same time that my corporate job called and offered to for us to separate. Left my corporate job. And as I look back on everything that has happened over the last 11 years, oh yeah, and then we moved to Georgia. I mean, it literally changed the trajectory of our lives. And it really does just remind me how important it is to not only listen to that voice, our intuition, and learn to trust it, but also to follow those breadcrumbs. Because had I not been willing to listen to my intuition, instead, maybe I would have listened to the coworkers who were like, it's just a pimple. You don't have to worry about that. Who knows what could have happened, right? So it's listening to your intuition, regardless what anybody else says. Trusting your own wisdom. Following the breadcrumbs that are presented before you. Sometimes now I forget about the breadcrumbs. So this day is another good reminder of that, to follow those breadcrumbs that are put before us. Because I truly, truly believe that is helpful, of course, that traditional medicine is. Those alternative modalities played a huge part in my healing process. I mean, theta healing is truly mind-blowing if you ever want to experience that. And just life coaching, the things, and listen, I have done a lot of work over the years on myself, even before breast cancer. I have worked with therapists, psychologists, I have explored lots, but I will say this. Nothing has impacted my life as much as life coaching has. And that is because it taught me. So I figure I started listening to my intuition more right around the time of my diagnosis, but life coaching really taught me how to kind of really focus on it and hone in and really start listening to my intuition about managing my thoughts. I mean, realizing that we get to choose what we want to think about is really kind of a game changer in life. And this is one of the pieces in Fat2Fierce that is the fierce mind. Realizing you don't have to believe every single thought that you think. You get to choose what you want to think about. Do I forget that sometimes? Yes, of course, I'm human. We all have human brains. But let me tell you how powerful it is when you realize that you get to choose what you're going to put your attention on. I often think about, do you ever go shopping for a new car? And like, depending what car you're looking for, all of a sudden you see them all over the road. That's because that's what your focus is on. That's what your attention is on. Okay. Think about it. If that can happen with a vehicle, it can happen with anything. What we think about, we bring about. What we put our attention towards is what's going to keep coming at us. So it is incredibly important to be very clear, very intentional on where we want to focus our attention and what we want to think about. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked here. So I'm going to wrap this up for the week. And again, I'm sharing this story because it is such a powerful reminder how important it is to learn to listen to your intuition, learn to distinguish that specific voice, that inner wisdom inside of you, that inner wisdom that told me back in December of 2013 that this was going to change my life. I remember it specifically. And I remember telling several people, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to change, but this diagnosis is going to change my life. I knew that so clearly, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just knew it was going to change my life. It was going to change our lives. And it did drastically. And sometimes I get upset. Getting emotional again. Sometimes I get upset because I think about what life would have been like had I not experienced this. I think we all do that. It's not helpful because literally, like, it's not helpful to think about, right? Because that's not what happened. But I do sometimes wonder, like, what would have happened? Like, what would our lives look like had I not gone through this? Had we not gone through this? But then I remember this is what happened. And I remember how grateful I am for everything I have learned in these last 11 years because I get to choose what I want to focus on. And I get to choose if I want to listen to my intuition, and I get to choose if I want to follow those breadcrumbs. And that is really powerful. All right, I could go on, but I'm not going to because I think you get the gist. Whew, thanks for being with me on this Cancerversary. I hope you have a great week. Talk to you next week. Are you ready to break free from stress eating and body shaming? It's time to get fierce. Fat2Fierce is a self-paced program that helps you build a new foundation of strength and balance without the toxic dieting mindset. This non-diet approach focuses on mindful eating, body acceptance, and lasting transformation. It's time to reclaim your power and find peace with food, your body, and yourself. Visit amyenglishcc.com to get started today.